You are listening to The Country of the Blind by H.G. Wells, narrated by Litnarrate. Welcome to Litnarrate. Sit back and enjoy classic literature brought to life through narration. 300 miles and more from Chimborazo, 100 from the snows of Cotopaxi, in the wildest wastes of Ecuador's Andes, there lies that mysterious mountain valley, cut off from all the world of men, the country of the blind. Long years ago, that valley lay so far open to the world that men might come at last through frightful gorges and over an icy pass into its equable meadows, and thither indeed men came, a family or so of Peruvian half-breeds fleeing from the lust and tyranny of an evil Spanish ruler. Then came the stupendous outbreak of Mindobamba, when it was night in Quito for 17 days, and the water was boiling at Yaguachi, and all the fish floating dying even as far as Guayaquil. Everywhere along the Pacific slopes there were landslips and swift thawings and sudden floods, and one whole side of the old Arauca crest slipped and came down in thunder, and cut off the country of the blind forever from the exploring feet of men. But one of these early settlers had chanced to be on the hither side of the gorges when the world had so terribly shaken itself, and he perforce had to forget his wife and his child and all the friends and possessions he had left up there, and start life over again in the lower world. He started it again, but ill. Blindness overtook him, and he died of punishment in the mines. But the story he told begot a legend that lingers along the length of the Cordilleras of the Andes to this day. He told of his reason for venturing back from that fastness, into which he had first been carried lashed to a llama, beside a vast bale of gear, when he was a child. The valley, he said, had in it all that the heart of man could desire: sweet water, pasture, uneven climate, slopes of rich brown soil, with tangles of a shrub that bore an excellent fruit, and on one side great hanging forests of pine that held the avalanches high. Far overhead on three sides, vast cliffs of gray-green rock were capped by cliffs of ice, but the glacier stream came not to them but flowed away by the farther slopes, and only now and then huge ice masses fell on the valley side. In this valley it neither rained nor snowed, but the abundant springs gave a rich green pasture. That irrigation would spread over all the valley space. The settlers did well indeed there. Their beasts did well and multiplied, and but one thing marred their happiness. Yet it was enough to mar it greatly. A strange disease had come upon them and had made all the children born to them there, and indeed several older children also blind. It was to seek some charm or antidote against this plague of blindness that he had with fatigue and danger and difficulty returned down the gorge. In those days, in such cases, men did not think of germs and infections, but of sins, and it seemed to him that the reason of this affliction must he in the negligence of these priestless immigrants to set up a shrine so soon as they entered the valley. He wanted a shrine, a handsome, cheap, effectual shrine to be erected in the valley. He wanted relics and such like potent things of faith, blessed objects, and mysterious medals and prayers. In his wallet he had a bar of native silver for which he would not account. He insisted there was none in the valley with something of the insistence of an inexpert liar. They had all clubbed their money and ornaments together, having little need for such treasure up there, he said, to buy them holy help against their ill. I figure this dim-eyed young mountaineer, sunburnt, gaunt, and anxious, hat-brim clutched feverishly, a man all unused to the ways of the lower world, telling this story to some keen-eyed, attentive priest before the great convulsion. I can picture him presently seeking to return with pious and infallible remedies against that trouble, and the infinite dismay with which he must have faced the tumbled vastness where the gorge had once come out. but the rest of his story of mischances is lost to me, save that I know of his evil death after several years. Poor stray from that remoteness. The stream that had once made the gorge now bursts from the mouth of a rocky cave, and the legend his poor, ill-told story set going developed into the legend of a race of blind men somewhere over there one may still hear today. And amidst the little population of that now isolated and forgotten valley the disease ran its course. The old became groping, the young saw but dimly, and the children that were born to them never saw at all. But life was very easy in that snow-rimmed basin, lost to all the world, with neither thorns nor briars, with no evil insects, nor any beasts save the gentle breed of llamas they had lugged and thrust, and followed up the beds of the shrunken rivers in the gorges up which they had come. The seeing had become purblind so gradually that they scarcely noticed their loss. They guided the sightless youngsters hither and thither until they knew the whole valley marvelously, and when at last sight died out, among them the race lived on. They had even time to adapt themselves to the blind control of fire, which they made carefully in stoves of stone. They were a simple strain of people at the first, unlettered, only slightly touched with the Spanish civilization, but with something of a tradition of the arts of old Peru and of its lost philosophy. Generation followed generation. They forgot many things. They devised many things. Their tradition of the greater world they came from became mythical in color and uncertain. In all things save sight they were strong and able, and presently chance sent one who had an original mind and who could talk and persuade among them, and then afterwards another. These two passed, leaving their effects, and the little community grew in numbers and in understanding, and met and settled social and economic problems that arose. Generation followed generation. Generation followed generation. There came a time when a child was born who was 15 generations from that ancestor who went out of the valley with a bar of silver to seek God's aid, and who never returned. Thereabout it chanced that a man came into them's community from the outer world. And this is the story of that man. He was a mountaineer from the country near Quito, a man who had been down to the sea and had seen the world, a reader of books in an original way, an acute and enterprising man, and he was taken on by a party of Englishmen who had come out to Ecuador to climb mountains, to replace one of their 3 Swiss guides who had fallen ill. He climbed here and he climbed there, and then came the attempt on Pariscotopetl, the Matterhorn of the Andes, in which he was lost to the outer world. The story of that accident has been written a dozen times. Pointer's narrative is the best. He tells how the little party worked their difficult and almost vertical way up to the very foot of the last and greatest precipice, and how they built a night shelter amidst the snow upon a little shelf of rock, and with a touch of real dramatic power, how presently they found Nunez had gone from them. They shouted, and there was no reply, shouted and whistled, and for the rest of that night they slept no more. As the morning broke, they saw the traces of his fall. It seems impossible he could have uttered a sound. He had slipped eastward towards the unknown side of the mountain. Far below, he had struck a steep slope of snow and plowed his way down it in the midst of a snow avalanche. His track went straight to the edge of a frightful precipice, and beyond that, everything was hidden. Far, far below, and hazy with distance, they could see trees rising out of a narrow, shut-in valley, the lost country of the blind. But they did not know it was the lost country of the blind, nor distinguish it in any way from any other narrow streak of upland valley. Unnerved by this disaster, they abandoned their attempt in the afternoon, and Pointer was called away to the war before he could make another attack. To this day, Parascotopetl lifts an unconquered crest, and Pointer's shelter crumbles unvisited amidst the snows, and the man who fell survived. At the end of the slope he fell 1,000 feet, and came down in the midst of a cloud of snow upon a snow slope even steeper than the one above. Down this he was whirled, stunned and insensible, but without a bone broken in his body, and then at last came to gentler slopes, and at last rolled out and lay still, buried amidst a softening heap of the white masses that had accompanied and saved him. He came to himself with a dim fancy that he was ill in bed, then realized his position with a mountaineer's intelligence and worked himself loose and, after a rest or so, out until he saw the stars. He rested flat upon his chest for a space, wondering where he was and what had happened to him. He explored his limbs and discovered that several of his buttons were gone and his coat turned over his head. His knife had gone from his pocket and his hat was lost, though he had tied it under his chin. He recalled that he had been looking for loose stones to raise his piece of the shelter wall. His ice axe had disappeared. He decided he must have fallen, and looked up to see, exaggerated by the ghastly light of the rising moon, the tremendous flight he had taken. For a while he lay, gazing blankly at the vast pale cliff towering above, rising moment by moment out of a subsiding tide of darkness. Its phantasmal, mysterious beauty held him for a space, and then he was seized with a paroxysm of sobbing laughter. After a great interval of time, he became aware that he was near the lower edge of the snow. Below, down what was now a moonlit and practicable slope, he saw the dark and broken appearance of rock-strewn turf. He struggled to his feet, aching in every joint and limb, got down painfully from the heaped loose snow about him, went downward until he was on the turf, and there dropped rather than lay beside a boulder, drank deep from the flask in his inner pocket, and instantly fell asleep. He was awakened by the singing of birds in the trees far below. He sat up and perceived he was on a little alp at the foot of a vast precipice that sloped only a little in the gully down which he and his snow had come. Over against him another wall of rock reared itself against the sky. The gorge between these precipices ran east and west, and was full of the morning sunlight, which lit to the westward the mass of fallen mountain that closed the descending gorge. Below him it seemed there was a precipice equally steep, but behind the snow in the gully he found a sort of chimney cleft dripping with snow water, down which a desperate man might venture. He found it easier than it seemed, and came at last to another desolate alp, and then after a rock climb of no particular difficulty to a steep slope of trees. He took his bearings and turned his face up the gorge, for he saw it opened out above upon green meadows, among which he now judged he was. He toiled wearily up the slope, heedless of every difficulty, and at last came to a level place, as still and as green as a lawn, with an intense blue sky above, and set with shining, graceful flowers that nodded at him. And close beneath the foothills of the southern cliff, he could see a little group of houses and other buildings, and a number of these slender, shapely trees, and beyond these the brown expanse of a pasture and a stream. As he approached the houses, his attention was attracted by a group of children playing in the meadow, and they seemed to him the strangest children he had ever seen. They were very still and quiet, as if they were playing some game, and they kept their faces all turned towards him as they ran. He was surprised at their silent gravity and the uniform direction of their motions. It was not simply a game, it seemed. They came on steadily, and they were not playing, but seeking him. They advanced in an even line, all looking earnestly at him. He stopped and tried to shout to them, but his voice was hoarse from his fall, and he could not make them hear. He made a step towards them, and they made a step towards him. He turned to go back, and they turned to follow him. He broke into a run, and they broke into a run. They were very swift, and in a moment they had surrounded him and laid hands upon him. One of them, a girl, spoke to him in a queer, high-pitched voice, and he answered in Spanish, but he could not understand her. He was led into one of the houses, and there he was given food and drink, and he was treated with a strange mixture of kindness and restraint. He was not a prisoner, but he was not free. He was a curiosity, a strange being from the outer world. They were all blind, and they had no conception of sight. They could not understand what he meant when he spoke of seeing. They thought he was mad, or that he was speaking in metaphors. They felt his face and his hands, and they marveled at his eyes, which they took to be some strange deformity. He tried to explain to them what sight was, but it was like explaining color to a blind man. They could not imagine it. They had their own ways of knowing the world through touch and hearing and smell, and they were content with them. He, on the other hand, could not understand their world. He could not see the dangers that they avoided, the paths that they followed, the things that they valued. He was like a man in a foreign country, ignorant of its language and customs. He soon discovered that they had a well-organized society with its own laws and customs. They were not savages. They were a civilized people, but their civilization was based on a different sense. They had no need of light, and they had no fear of darkness. They lived in a world of sound and touch and smell, and they were perfectly adapted to it. He, with his sight, was the alien, the misfit. He was given a home, and he tried to make himself useful. He helped them with their work, and he tried to teach them about the world he came from. But they were not interested. They thought his stories were fables or the ravings of a madman. They pitied him for his strange affliction, his seeing, which they regarded as a kind of delusion. There was one woman, however, who was more sympathetic. Her name was Medina Sarote, and she was the daughter of the chief. She was a beautiful woman with a gentle voice and a kind heart. She was curious about him, and she listened to his stories with more patience than the others. He fell in love with her, and she seemed to return his affection. But their love was forbidden. The laws of the country of the blind forbade marriage with a person who was not blind. They considered blindness to be the normal state and sight to be a defect. They believed that he was not fully human and that his seeing was a disease that might be passed on to his children. He was faced with a terrible choice. He could stay in the country of the blind and live with Medina Sarote, but only if he agreed to have his eyes put out. The operation would be painful, and it would mean the end of his life as a seeing man. Or he could leave the country of the blind and return to the world of sight, but he would have to leave Medina Sarote behind. He thought about it for a long time. He loved Medina Sarote, and he wanted to be with her. But he also loved his sight, and he could not bear the thought of losing it. He was torn between two worlds, two ways of life. In the end, he decided to leave. He could not give up his sight. He would go back to the mountains and try to find his way to the outer world. He would take Medina Sarote with him if she would come. But she would not come. She was afraid of the outer world, and she did not believe that it existed. She thought it was a figment of his imagination. He left the country of the blind alone. He climbed the precipice, and he made his way through the gorges until he came at last to the world of sight. He was free, but he was also alone. He had lost Medina Sarote, and he had lost the world of the blind. He was a man between two worlds, belonging to neither. He never forgot the country of the blind, or the woman he loved. He would often think of them and wonder what they were doing. He would sometimes dream of returning, but he never did. He knew that he could not go back, that he could not live in their world, and that they could not live in his. He was a man without a home, a wanderer in a world that he could not fully understand. Thank you for listening to Litnarrate. If you enjoyed this classic tale, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more timeless literature brought to life through narration. See you in the next story.